Cicero said, "What society does to its children, so will its children do to society." As parents, we have certain aspirations. We want our kids to know we love them. We want to be proud of them. We want them to grow, develop, and be happy. Maybe we want to overcome our own poor parenting or lack of parenting that we had as a child, and we want to be the change that we always hoped for. When you think of the question, how do you want your kids to describe you? What comes to mind? For me, I want my kids to say that I was an example of a growth mindset, constant learning, and improving and living a healthy life. I want them to say that I embodied what I taught and that my life was one of crescendo, not stopping, not getting stuck at any one point for too long. What about you? If you applied the funeral test, what would you want your kids to say about you at your funeral? I think as parents, this question and the answers that come from it can create a guiding force that propels us forward to become an evolved parent. Today's conversation takes us on the path of exploration into the question of what does it mean to be an evolved parent? Why are our early examples in life so important? And how do we overcome some poor parenting we may have received to become the best parent we can be? That's today on the Evolve Podcast.
Welcome to the Evolve Podcast. Evolve your body, evolve your mind, evolve your soul, and evolve your tribe. And now it's time to disrupt.
Welcome back to the Evolve Podcast, where evolved men and women come to disrupt, connect, and get inspired. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor, Med1 Capital, for sponsoring the Evolve Podcast. We appreciate all the support. Med1 Capital exists for the sole purpose of making medical equipment available to the healthcare industry. You can find more information at med1group.com. As always, joining us from the Mind Palace in Oberlin, Ohio, the most interesting man that I know is W. Miles Riley. Welcome, Miles.
Nice. Thank you, Steve. Listen, I was listening to your introduction, and after you say what you said or said what you said, I'm going to call Johnny up and go, Johnny, tell me about your dad. And I want you to call Tiago.
I think that's a good trade-off. Yeah. I haven't talked to Tiago in a few months, so it's probably a good time to do that. Yeah. I need to check in and see how you're doing. I love that. Yeah. I'm not sure what he's going to say today because I woke him up and we had a conversation about making sure that he's getting up at the same time because school starts in just a few days. And so we've had the conversation of your bedtime and your rise time need to be pretty consistent. Otherwise, you're going to run into a brick wall when school starts. So that might be loaded question today.
I just went through a slightly moderate hell with my son.
We like slightly moderate hells. We're not so sure about full-blown hell, but slightly moderate.
He's too good of a kid. He'll never take me to full-blown hell, but he sure gets his toe in there every once in a while.
Nice. Well, and somewhere in the mountains of Utah, I am Steve Cutler. Today's guest is my good friend, Scott Jones. Scott is a relationship expert, a licensed clinical mental health therapist, a public speaker, organizational consultant, and owner and director of Stillwater Academy. Scott has been working with adolescents and their families for over 25 years. He was the creator and director of Project Impact, a community-based drug and alcohol treatment program for adjudicated youth in Georgia. With over 25 years of experience in the adolescent treatment industry, Scott understands that change requires risk and healing and can only happen in a safe and nurturing environment. Scott takes a strength-based approach relating to and a relational approach to therapy and loves helping people discover their unique strengths and see their inherent value, oftentimes for the first time. Scott specializes in working with clients who have co-occurring issues that often occur with addiction, such as depression, anxiety, trauma, and attachment issues. Scott particularly enjoys working with clients who have experienced trauma and loss. And when not at work, Scott can be found on the soccer pitch, refereeing amateur, high school, college, semi-pro, and professional soccer. Or for those of you listening across the pond, football. He serves on the Utah State Soccer Referee Committee and loves mentoring up-and-coming referees. He enjoys golf, running, cycling, and anything that has to do with water and sand. Scott has completed several half marathons, Lotoja, and the Salt to Saint cycling events. And for those who have not heard some of our other episodes, Lotoja is a race that goes from Logan to Jackson. Look it up. It's not for the faint of heart. And neither is Salt to Saint. That basically goes from Salt Lake City all the way down to Las Vegas, right? Sin City?
St.
Or
George. St.
yeah.
George.
Oh, St. George. St. George, too. Okay. Still not easy. Scott and his wife, Mikkel, are the proud parents of 3 amazing kids, 3 kid in-laws, and 3 grandchildren. Let's just keep it at 3s. And his favorite title is Opa. Scott Jones, welcome to the Evolve Podcast.
Thanks, Steve. That bio is way too long. It's too long.
Well,
Who
when
wrote
you've been
that?
doing what you've been doing for so long, the bio just tends to pick up more stuff. Well, we're excited to have you, though. I mean, you've got a great background in this space. And it's a conversation that I think you and I have had multiple times. And Miles and I have had more times than we can count. In fact, I was telling a client the other day about a conversation that I had with Miles, and he said, "Oh, is that a podcast episode?" And I said, "No, that was just a phone call." We have the best podcast episodes that are never recorded. It's through most of our phone calls, right?
Yeah, we're like the proverbial jazz musicians, where you hear about the best jazz comes from practice and rehearsals. And
Yeah.
they go to actually perform, and they're great performances, but they weren't like the practices.
And nobody was there, or there was a small group that was there. So just believe us that if you're listening to this podcast and you say, wow, how could it get any better? Oh, believe me, it does. It just happens on the phone calls with Miles and I. Well, Scott, as we talked the other day, I had mentioned that I had sent a message to a few of my friends who are pretty passionate about being the best father they can be to their kids. So I wanted to start with a few questions and just talk about a few topics that they brought up. Does that sound good?
Sounds great. Yeah,
Great.
I like your question there, the first that you were in your intro. I love that. It's a great question.
It's a pretty powerful question. I'd actually like to start there. So that first question, when we think about as a parent, what would you want your kids to say? How do you want your kids to describe you? Why do you think that's such a powerful question?
Well, because I don't think we think about it much, right? We just get in the day-to-day grind of things, and we're not very intentional about things. But when you stop and think about, you called it a funeral question, right? If you're at my funeral, how am I going to be remembered?
Yeah.
That takes some thought. My wife and I talked about that the other night. You know, what do you want your parents to say? And it was interesting because we were different. We were pretty different. Some commonalities, but things that are important to her, not necessarily the things that are important to me. And I think that's okay.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it's a good. I feel like this conversation we're going to have today, Steve, I don't know where it's going to go exactly, but I call it same boat therapy, right? Because we're all in the same boat. I've been doing this for a long time, but that doesn't mean I have the answers. And so it's really a little same boat therapy today.
I like that. I think we've what's that TV show on Apple? I think we were joking about it one day, where Harrison Ford and Jason Segel, they're counselors or psychologists, and they you see them going and talking to each other, right? So even experts need to have these conversations with other people because we are all in that same boat. And so I think for anybody that's listening to this today, I hope they take the mindset of, hey, I want to learn and grow, but I'm also in the same boat as these guys talking here. So let's talk about modeled behavior. One of my friends, he said, I've really struggled as a parent to fight back against the bad modeled behavior that I experienced when I was growing up. And I imagine many of our listeners feel the same way. What would you tell a parent who had what they thought was poor parenting as a child?
There's a couple thoughts that my first thing would say is, yeah, me too. Everybody, we all had poor parenting. Every single one of us had poor parenting growing up, even if we have, great parents with great skills, because there's no, it's a full contact sport, parenting, right? And you don't get a playbook. So the first thing I would do is just, give yourself a little bit of grace in that, right? Okay, so you're recognizing some things that you don't want to repeat, or maybe you want to do different. Great. That is a great place to start. And then the next place to go is, give yourself some grace and probably give your parents a little grace, because I really have a mantra that we do the best we can. People are doing the best they know how to do.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I've loved about our conversation, Steve, and even the whole kind of theme of your podcast is, let's evolve, let's get better, let's get more skills. So if you recognize some things in your parents that you don't want to repeat, well, here's what I can guarantee: yes you will, unless you're real intentional about it, right? You need to learn some skills to do something different, because what happens a lot of the time is, I'm never going to do that, and so we swing to the opposite kind of extreme, which is not always healthy either. So
yeah,
I
like how you talked
think
about though,
starting from a
starting with
place of,
empathy, right?
yeah,
Starting with empathy, it's pretty powerful, because I mean, the reality is at a certain point, our kids are going to grow up and they're going to get to the point where they look back and say, well, I didn't like this. And what I've experienced just from observation is every kid experiences the parenting different. Even if parents are trying to be fair, consistent, they all experience
right.
parenting different because the perspectives are different. And one of the things we've talked to our kids about is, my oldest daughter, she had a completely different growing up than my son did because of their age difference. We were in a completely different economic structure at the time that my daughter was born. We were still in college. We were just basically living paycheck to paycheck. And then as time changed, we were able to acquire more things, and my son just grew up in a totally different scenario and situation. So I love the empathy piece, and that's something I can really resonate with as I look at my parents and the hard work that they put into raising us. But they continued to grow and evolve throughout their life and their parenting. And what a powerful starting point is just to say, all right, let's have a little bit of empathy to go to build off of. And then you talked about how recognizing and then saying, yeah, you probably did. Great. Recognize that. Now what?
Now what?
And simplistically put, if I point at my parents, they're going to point at their parents, who in turn are going to point to their parents. And at no point in that pointing is there a book that some ancestor got on parenting.
Right.
So we just keep pointing.
We're going to point at the point.
That's right.
I like that.
I talk a lot, so I work with adolescents and their parents, but when I'm working with, adolescents, we talk a lot about family systems. A family is a system. That system changes and evolves, and we talk a lot about that generational piece that you're talking about, Miles. The idea that this isn't, your behaviors, teenager that I'm talking to, this goes back generations, right? This goes back generations and generations. You have a chance to change the tree, right? You can do something different about it right now. And if you, talking to the adolescents still, but this applies to parents, if they can change the tree a little bit by learning some better skills, having more awareness, doing some things differently, that's not only going to affect the tree, beneath them, that goes backwards too. That's going to have an impact on parents. And so for your friend who's like, how do I deal with this idea that my parents maybe weren't what I needed, as he seeks to change, or he or she seeks to change and be a better parent, it's also going to have an impact both ways. That's what I see over and over and over. Things change.
It's pretty powerful to think about how much our ancestry, the choices, the decisions that our ancestors made, and also to the biology. What DNA are they passing on? I had a conversation with my one of my brothers one day, and he asked me the question. He said, "Hey, did you realize that our great grandfather had committed suicide?" And I said, "Yeah, it was pretty widely known. I mean, he was a famous guy. He was the second governor of Utah, a very prominent banker, and towards the tail end of his life, it was believed that he took his life through a self-inflicted gunshot wound." And my brother looked at me and says, "I had no idea that was the case. Why have we never talked about this?" I mean, you think about that this mental illness whatever it is, in any shape or form, has a tendency to get passed down through the DNA. And so he goes, why have we never talked about this? I said, well, I don't know. I guess I just knew it. You knew it. I thought everybody knew it. He goes, we got to open up this conversation. We need to be talking about mental health and the importance of mental health. And if that is something where aspects of that are genetically passed on, then this needs to be an open conversation. And we need to have those types of conversations and just be real about it. But far too often, those things aren't talked about.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, the other thing, we'll get into this probably more as we talk, but you need to drop the comparison game and your own shame, deal with that piece.
Yeah, great point.
We're looking around, comparing
and it's
ourselves
so
to
easy
others.
to do. So easy to do, especially today, because our lives are out there in the digital universe, and whatever life we want to put out there for people to see and perceive how our life is, we're seeing this highlight reel of people who are living what we would consider to be this ultimate life. And we're comparing their highlights to our lowlights. And that comparison just is, as the old saying goes, comparison is the thief of joy. Scott, how would a person start to overcome becoming a carbon copy of their parents and the challenges that maybe their parents have?
Yeah. I think so. Once you have that empathy piece and you're start dealing with your own shame, I think that you have to decide what you want to be as a parent, right? You talked about being in college and having your own daughter. You're just surviving. You're keeping your head above water at that point, right?
Right.
I don't know how much time you had. I was in the same boat. I didn't have a lot of time to decide what kind of parent I wanted to be in those moments, right? But it's got to be intentional. So getting help, and that to me, that's more than just going down to the local bookstore and getting a self-help book, but talking to professionals, getting your own therapy, doing your own work. I mean, I'm a therapist, and I started doing my own therapy with my dad just as recently as 10 years ago.
Wow,
he passed away, and it brought some stuff up, and I thought, oh, I guess I have some stuff to work on. So that never stops. I don't think that ever stops. But I think being intentional, even so far as going to, write it down, what do I want my kids to think about me, is a really powerful tool. And then keeping that somewhere where you're referring to it.
Writing it down, I think that's a super powerful thing. Go ahead, Miles.
Think it's interesting. I'm hearing this. This is the first time I've ever processed it like this. If we're talking about raising human beings, then doesn't the label parenting kind of diminish? Because we're talking about connecting and guiding and being guided by another person. Our kids teach us just as much as we teach them. And so it would seem like the whole idea of parenting just becomes this kind of boundary. But if we get after ourselves in a way to communicate better to another human being, that bleeds into all human beings. I'm just speculating here. I'm purely speculating. And this is the first time I've ever heard
you're speaking my language, Miles, because to me, it's all about connection, right? Obviously. And that looks different when your kids are 2 than when your kids are 17. That looks a lot different. And one of the hangups that parents fall into that I work with is they don't adjust. They might have been a great at that relationship piece when they're little, but now that the kid has some autonomy and needs to start pushing back, a teenager's job is push back. That's what we want them to do. That we want them to kind of test the boundaries. The kids that test the boundaries and push back in healthy ways, right? They go on to be the most successful adults. That's okay. Their job is to push. Our job as a parent is to be consistent, hold those boundaries, healthy boundaries, while keeping the connection number one. Connection is what it's all about. Absolutely. And this idea we use, you ever heard the word Ubuntu? Do you know Ubuntu?
No,
No.
no. What is that?
Right. So we don't have time. You're gonna have to look it up. It's a way, it's a way
How
of
do you
being.
spell it?
So Ubuntu, Ubuntu.
Okay.
Ubuntu. So it's an African word, but it kind of is translated I am because we are.
Oh, interesting. Powerful.
And it's this idea, I mean, you kind of just said it, Miles, like I am me because of my relationships.
Yeah.
Without those
Yeah.
relationships, I'm a different person, right? So as a parent, if we're always trying to be in that place where we're nurturing the relationship and doing that in a systematic way, that's really, really important.
I think the connection piece is really important, and as you talked about, it's an ongoing evolution. I mean, I think about
Mm-hmm.
it was easy when the kids were young to be a quote unquote great dad, because all you had to do was make jokes and fart noises, and they were dying laughing, and I was the greatest dad in the world when I would do that. But then as they got older, it was a matter of finding ways to connect at the level that they were at. I mean, um, for my daughters, that was totally different than for my son. And now that my son is 17 years old, that's a totally different game too. That connection piece is important. But I also
Yeah.
like, Scott, how you're talking about holding a line. Our job is to hold a line of accountability. Our job is to make sure that we are as consistent as we can be, because they do look towards that. That consistency is critical for their overall growth and development. Aside from not holding a line of consistency, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see when it comes to parenting?
Yeah. That's such a good question. It's a bit, I want to answer it a little bit philosophically because I think that specific behaviors we do as parents come from deeper places, right? So really one of the biggest pitfalls I see parents fall into, and it looks different ways, but it has to do with worthiness. It just has to do with this idea
Hmm.
that I'm enough.
Interesting.
So as a parent, I'm enough. As a child, I'm enough. But instead, we kind of, especially, in our society, we have this idea of I will be enough when whatever that is. I get that promotion, I lose enough weight, whatever it is. I'm going to be worthy when. Um, and if we as parents are struggling with that, which we all do, remember, same boat therapy,
Yeah.
we're all in the same
Yeah.
boat. We all do this. It affects how we interact, and it affects kind of what we teach our kids about love and belonging.
Hmm.
You talk about connection, talk about love and belonging. I saw a little thing on social media just this morning that said um, the two things we want to pass on to our kids is roots and wings. And I loved that.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
We want them to have roots that are deep, and they have a sense of identity, and they know who they are, and they can fly on their own. They don't need us. They get to a point where they don't need us so much. And that's a great thing. But it starts with worthiness.
Yeah.
Right. So let me give you an example. If I, as a parent, if my worthiness comes from my kid liking me, like then that's going to affect the way I hold boundaries. It's going to affect the way I parent in every way. Do you know what I mean by liking me?
Totally.
Like I don't want my kid to be mad at me, because if my kid's mad at me, I have this sense of worthiness and shame. The opposite of worthiness is shame. When we don't feel worthy of love and belonging, we feel shame, which is different than guilt. Guilt is I made a mistake. Shame is something wrong with me.
Fundamentally, something's wrong.
Fundamentally, something's wrong with me.
Right.
So when we operate from that sort of a place and we don't know it, usually we don't really understand it, that's going to translate into all sorts of parenting pitfalls. So that will look like not being able to handle when our kid is not doing what we want them to do. And and that's as little as I'm not picking up my toys to I don't come home on a curfew. So if my kid is late for curfew, if inside that triggers some sort of shame, I'm not, if I was a good parent, we wouldn't be having these problems. Then that sets you up for a lot of failure, right? So it goes back to we have to be working on ourselves and always evolving as parents and looking at where does my shame come from, and that probably comes from my parents a little bit, right? And we pass that on in different ways. Like another example would be your 4-year-old spills the milk and they're crying, they're upset, and you give them a really good message. You send them a message like, it's okay, honey, no problem. We all make mistakes. Let's clean it up together. I'm not mad. Good message. But then later on, she sees you, I don't know, you drop a glass while loading the dishwasher and it shatters all over the ground. And the words that you're saying out loud is, how can I be so freaking stupid? I can't believe I do something that stupid. We pass that on. They see what we do more than what we say, you know?
Pretty
So
powerful. Yeah, that's
so it
pretty
starts with
powerful.
from a place of, thinking about that worthiness, and that to me really dovetails with the other thing that I try to teach parents and the teens I work with is this idea of perfectionism, this idea that I have to do everything right all the time,
Yeah.
Which is a lot different than healthy striving.
Right.
We want healthy
Right.
striving.
Right.
But perfectionism is all about outside in stuff. What will people think if they knew?
Yeah.
And
Feeding
I
the
can't tell
external
you how,
ego concept, right?
yeah,
Rather than striving from just wanting to genuinely improve as a human being.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So if I'm coming from a place of of perfectionism, so I have to be, my worthiness comes from an outside source, what people think of me. So what my kids think of me, what my spouse thinks of me, what my neighbors think of me, what my friends on social media think of me, that's going to affect my parenting. That'll color everything I do. And it does it in pretty insidious ways, right? Um, I don't know, you'll say and do things differently than if you have an attitude of, I may not like what you're doing. I may not like your behavior, and your behavior is unacceptable. We're going to talk about your behavior, but I love and accept you no matter what.
Yeah.
There's not anything you can do to ruin that. And sometimes we get sideways with that message with our kids,
It also it
and
also
I'll
sounds
go
like
ahead,
it.
Miles.
Oh, I'm sorry. It also sounds like it sets you up for hypocrisy and contradiction because you're so busy trying to be
Sure.
perfect. And that
Yeah. Great point.
when as you said, they watch what we do more than what we say. And so that if you are holding this ideal up of perfection and you're not achieving it, which you're not gonna, and your kids see it, that's when they start to see chinks in your armor and almost
Mhm.
this kind of vapor lack of trust, like a mist. It's not a concrete thing that they're seeing it in a concrete way, but they don't have the language for it because they're kids. But they see the
Mhm.
hypocrisy and the contradiction, I guess.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think, trust, honesty, and respect are the foundations of any relationship. And when when you're not aligned with what you teach and then what you do, there's no trust there. And
Yeah.
frankly, you're not being completely honest and you're not respecting the fact that we're all human. And so I think that, when you think about that triad that creates this foundation for every relationship, yeah, I couldn't agree
Yeah.
more. It's pretty powerful to think about. One of the things, Scott, that we get criticized about with Evolve and the Evolve podcast is that we talk about a lot of different topics. And I think what a lot of people miss is they say, well, you're supposed to just focus on one thing. And the people who say that are missing the whole point. Our philosophy has always been that when you evolve your body at a certain point, in order to evolve your body to develop the body that you want to function well, you've got to challenge your mind. In order to then challenge your mind, you're going to reach some barriers that will be more soul level barriers. The mind can't go beyond that. You got to dig a little bit deeper and figure out at the heart of who you are, what's banging around inside of my soul. And then as you do that, you naturally evolve your tribe. Because if you step into the role of leader in your family fully and completely with an evolved body, an evolved mind, and a more evolved soul, you naturally become a better parent. you naturally become a better leader. But if you just try and act the part, it resonates in a totally different way. Just like you were saying, spilled milk with the child, it's okay, honey. Broke a glass and they see you fall apart, well, they're going to follow the fall apart mom or the fall apart dad more than they're going to follow the kind mom or the kind dad that showed a little bit of compassion there. So I couldn't agree more with what you're talking about, that it's so important to work on ourselves first so that we can become more evolved parents. What other pitfalls do you see parents making?
You know, that I see these things, and I really take a systemic approach to things, right? And so specific pitfalls I see kids or parents using with their kids, and when I'm working with adolescents, right, it's the stuff that they can see right through. When we're manipulating them to get what we want, you know, getting back to shame, the problem with shame is it really works. It's a great behavior modification tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are you so stupid? Why would you make a decision like that? You know, we've treated you better. You know, those types of messages.
Yeah.
Gets short-term results.
Always. Always.
But
does.
it doesn't help a person change behavior, right? So using shame talk versus kind of solution focused talk in our parenting is a big pitfall.
So give an example of that. I think it's pretty powerful. So what's the difference between shame talk and how did you describe it?
Solution focused right?
Yeah.
So the way I think about it is, so think of a problem you're having with your kid. I don't know. Okay, what's one you guys struggle with? Anything come up?
Well, something came up. My cousin, it's glaring in my cousin because he grew up in pretty dire circumstances, and he ended up becoming a doctor, a pretty prominent doctor, a big house, and then his kids were coming up. He had 3 kids, and he would always shame his kids about what he had, because the kids, you know, growing up in a certain amount of affluence and luxury. And one of the things he always did with them is that when they did something wrong, you can't believe how I grew up, and you guys have it made. And that's how he used to try to shame them into better behavior with whatever it is that they had done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why aren't you grateful? You need to be grateful for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good example. I think that if you think about a behavioral issue that might be happening, that you're struggling, how do I deal with this with my child? One way to do it is to assume that that's happening because what do we say about troubled kids? That they're unmotivated, they're manipulative, they're lazy, they're oppositional, all those things, right? And if they're those things, what are we going to do as a parent? Really, the reason they're not doing what they should be doing, or they're doing too much of something they shouldn't be doing, if we're looking at it from that frame of reference, then it's a motivational problem, right? And if you have a motivational problem, what are you going to do? You're going to motivate them. How do we motivate our kids as parents? Punishments and rewards,
carrot and stick,
right? Yeah, carrot and the stick. So that's if all you see is motivational problems, then all you can really use is carrot and sticks. And carrot and stick parenting only lasts so long.
Yeah.
It doesn't create change. If, on the other hand, you come from a framework of kids would if they could, we all would if we could, right? If I have better skills, I'm just doing the best I can. So I would choose to be happy. Why would anybody choose not to be happy, right? No one wakes up in the morning and said, I think I'll become, a drug addict and be homeless today. Nobody does that.
Right.
We would choose to be happy. If something's getting in the way, then we have to, as parents, we got to help figure out what is getting in the way. So one way to do that is, instead of seeing it as, oh, my kid has this problem, I don't know what to do. The problem's out here. Me and my kid don't have a problem. We're going to tackle the problem together.
Oh, say that again for the people in the back.
So the problem, whatever that is, let's put it over here.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
It's external.
I don't have a problem with between us because we have a relationship, right?
Yeah.
We are
Love that.
connected. So we're going to tackle this together.
That is beautiful. What a great way to frame it. I think that paradigm shift is seismic in nature. I mean, how many times do people I've seen people just lose it at times over what they call a lack of respect. You're not doing this because you don't respect me. But it's not, if a child's doing something, it's not necessarily a lack of respect. I mean, a child doesn't have to obey every single thing that you say and do to show you respect. The problem is external. That is so powerful. I hope people pick that one up.
Yeah, and there's a way, there's a way to do that, that's real practical, and it teaches skills. Instead of saying, you're always late for school, you always sleep in, and you're always late for school, and I'm freaking sick of it. And if you're not in school on time tomorrow, I'm taking your phone. Okay, so that's a motivational problem. I'm going to motivate them by giving them a consequence that they don't like, right?
Yeah.
That'd be one way to approach it. Another way to approach it would be, hey, son, I've noticed that you're late to school a lot. Have you noticed that? Tell me about it. What's going on? And that puts the problem outside of your son, right? The problem is I'm late for school. I'm recognizing it. What do you recognize? And the hard thing as a parent to do is you ask that question, is then you have to shut up and let them talk.
Yeah.
And they might not talk at first. They might say, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to talk to you, Dad. But you keep working at it until you get to the point where they'll say, well, yeah, I hate getting up in the morning, or I stay up all night doing homework, or whatever it is. They will come up with their side of the problem. And
There's a very Zen-like approach here. I mean, when you think about this is you're talking about the conscious observer, rather than creating an identity for that person. If you're always sleeping in and you're always late, then you are a person who's always sleeping in and always late, and you will live up to that identity. But if you are becoming a conscious observer, what you're teaching your kids right here is just to become a conscious observer. Hey, I've noticed this. Hey, I've seen this. What do you see?
Yep.
A beautiful way to
and then you ask for solutions. Then you might say, okay, here's what I noticed. Here's how it affects me. I'm late for work. I'm worried about you.
Show the impact, right?
We're observing. And then you work on solutions together. And what we want to do as parents all the time is say, I have a good solution for you. But we have to get them to give us solutions. And a lot of times, you say, well, do you have any ideas what we could do? And they'll throw out an idea. It's a horrible idea. Well, how about I just don't go to school anymore? That would solve the problem. And, what you have to do as a parent, whatever idea they throw out, you just say, well, that's an idea. Can we think of others? You don't say that's the worst idea ever.
Yeah.
That's a starting point. Right. And that really shifts that does so many things. It shifts the problem from, it's not, I'm a problem kid. It's, there's a problem behavior going on. It helps you keep the relationship intact, and it teaches them so many skills.
Totally.
Skills they lack.
Love it. It's you're talking about a methodology that I often teach when I go speak to organizations when it comes to coaching. And when you understand what the problem is, you identify the problem, and then you're talking about the impact, and you're asking for solutions. The number one question I get asked by leaders, and I would say young leaders, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, I've got executives that I've worked with that have been in leadership positions for a quarter of a century. And they say, what if I let somebody create their own plan? What if the plan sucks? They say, well, the idea isn't to let a sucky plan go out there. The idea is to say, what's your solution? Give me some ideas. And if they come back with some bad solutions, you just say, I appreciate the starting point. I think we're kind of in a brainstorming phase. So how about we continue to brainstorm until we find a solution that's going to work to meet all of the objectives we talked about? And that trains the brain to shift, right? Whatever, if you throw it out there that, hey, here are the objectives that we're going for, the thing you thought about might not fully be the solution. Now you're training your child to think and expand further. In fact, my kids probably hate it, but it works. The question that I ask when I say, so what do you think? And they go, well, I don't know. And I'll say, but if you did know, what would you think? Well, it's And then every once in a while I get the, oh, Dad, don't ask me that question. I said, but you do know if you thought about it in a different way. And if you use your imagination. The funny thing is that I found about 9 times out of 10 that question works extremely well. Or what's the Anchorman quote? 9 times out of 10, it works every time.
You know what? I think it's paramount. You said something that's really interesting, and I think the second part of that equation, and this is a trust issue. I always say the difference between men and women is when men get advice and they're resistant to it when they're alone, they really think about it. So when you propose things like that to your kids, you have to trust enough that as they're laying around, then they'll start to think about the issue.
Great point.
And without resistance, they might start to play with the issue. And then all of a sudden you start to see solutions come up, but you have to let them stew in it for a little while when you ask the question that you had just asked, Steve.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I
there's
think
got to be
it's
some
like,
time to
a work in
marinate.
progress. Yeah.
Got to be some time to marinate. Scott, when a parent asks that or asks a question and talks about some of the solutions, and a child brings up a solution, what would the next step be?
So the next step is you got to have a solution that meets both of your needs.
Okay.
Right. That's the tough part. So you just keep going until their need is addressed and your need is addressed, and you just don't give up until you get there. And that could take a long time. You maybe don't do that in a day, but we can't jump to it's my way or the highway, right? I tell parents, and this, by the way, I didn't this doesn't come out of my brain necessarily. This is all, I love Ross Greene. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ross Greene, but
I haven't.
He pioneered a lot of these concepts, but he suggests that, we look at things in 3 ways. Plan A, plan B, and plan C. Plan A is whatever the problem is happening. If we're doing a plan A approach, that is, I'm imposing my will as a parent. It's just going to be my way. And there's times when that has to happen. So, especially when we're talking about safety and things. I'm not going to apply this collaborative approach when my 4-year-old's running out into Redwood Road, right? So plan A that works sometimes. Plan C is we're going to drop it for now. And for now, we're going to drop it. We can't solve every problem right now because relationship is the most important, right? When my kid comes home late, curfew, and I'm hopping mad and I'm ready to just lay into him, that's not the time to talk about it. We're going to drop it for now. Right? We're going to address that sometime else. And if we don't address it, right then or the next day, that's okay, as long as we get back to it when we're in a better, spot with each other. But plan B is this kind of collaborative approach where, we're gonna show empathy. We're gonna put the problem outside of us. We're gonna look for solutions, and then those solutions have to meet both our needs. And we're gonna collaborate on that, and then we're gonna follow through, right? And it's so simple. So I have 3 kids. My oldest is a daughter, and she has 2 kids of her own, and we were in Disneyland. I know that's one of Steve's favorite places, I heard recently.
Yeah.
We were in Disneyland, and you have a 5-year, well, almost 5, like a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, essentially, right? Grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, 4-year-old and 2-year-old. And we're on day 3, and they're doing pretty good. They're actually doing pretty good, these 2 kids. But
that sounds like a recipe for breakdowns for me.
Yeah.
I remember my kids, they get so tired on after the secret.
The secret to a good Disneyland trip is bring the grandparents. That's the secret.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
But we finally had a meltdown, like an epic meltdown, and the 4-year-old wanted root beer. The parents had said, we'll get root beer at lunch. We go to a place to eat, and this restaurant doesn't serve root beer.
Oh, no.
And so we're in a public place, and he is losing his mind.
Nice.
Right?
Nice.
All my old parenting stuff is coming up, and I have literally, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I still have stupid thoughts like, oh, what do people think? I wonder if if people knew I was a relationship expert and my grandson was acting like this, what would they think? I have all my own crap come
That's
up, and
great. Yeah.
I would have, you know, 20 years ago, picked him up and taken him out and given him time to calm down. My daughter, I watched her take a breath, like physically go, and then she started saying things like, those are big feelings. Now, this is a 4-year-old. It's not a 14-year-old. It's different, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
4-year-old,
Okay.
those are big feelings. It's okay to have big feelings, but there's no root beer. Your feelings aren't going to change that. Ah, those are big feelings. If you can't control those feelings, it's okay. But we're going to go over here. She just stayed cool, calm, and collected in this storm. And eventually they did take him out because he wouldn't calm down. Eventually he calmed down. But when he calmed down, they immediately went into that problem solving kind of collaborative approach and got him to a place of, okay, we're going to find a place that has root beer, but we're going to do it after lunch. And he came back in and finished his lunch.
Nice.
And then grandma and grandpa spent the next 3 hours trying to find a place to get root beer.
Apparently, root
But
beer is not as prevalent.
I was so enthralled. I was like, that's fantastic parenting.
What a
Right.
great example. Yeah, it goes back to
And
what Miles
I
talked
loved
about. We
that.
learn from kids. Our
Yeah.
kids teach us and bring things out. I think there's one of the important lessons there is when we talk about the psychological state, right? We've got trait psychology, we got state psychology, and the psychological state that you're in that moment. You
Yeah.
might be flooded with a lot of emotion. You may be, starting to feel a sense of embarrassment or frustration, and really being a leader as a parent dictates that you pause, that you understand what your emotion is, and then you ask the question, okay, so what? What am I going to do? Now what? What am I going to do? So I may feel this way. I might feel frustrated or embarrassed or upset that my child is yelling and screaming about root beer. So what? What am I going to do? I've seen over the years where when a child is upset and crying, then the parent takes it to another level. And now you have two people throwing tantrums. One's just larger and stands over the other one. And
Yeah.
that's always baffled me. Not to say I haven't lost my temper, right? I mean, I'm not, I'm like you said, same boat. But my methodology, my approach was always to look at what was going on and to say, okay, if we're heightened here, the only way to bring it down is to remain calm and to remain stoic and to remain, in this position where we can eventually get to the point where we can have a conversation. Because if you match energy and you go even higher, well, you're just showing your kid what's supposed to happen when things don't go wrong or don't go right. They're having a tantrum over root beer. Now you're having a tantrum over them having a tantrum.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So what an amazing example your daughter set.
I talk with parents all the time about when your kid is having a storm, you have to remember that storm is not about you.
Yeah.
They're just having a
Great
storm.
point. Yeah.
But if you think it's directed towards you, then you might add to the storm, right? And now we have a class 5 hurricane going on.
Yeah.
But if they're just storming, that's
Yeah.
okay. We can help them de-escalate that.
They've got to be the eye in the storm, right? They've got to be the calm. They've got to be the calmness to bring the storm and the hurricane down.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a great example. I love how you talked about breath. Can you talk a little bit more about why breath is so important in those critical moments with kids?
Yeah. Well, breathing, obviously, none of us do it right most of the time.
Yeah. I agree with that
Um,
100%.
you preach that. And so when we take time to take a breath, that calms us down at a limbic level, right?
Yep.
Even beneath consciousness, it tells us it's going to be okay. And it takes us out of that fight, flight, freeze response that is so easy to go into when we are stressed. Just breathing, slow breathing through your nose, belly breathing can bring you down. First responders do it all the time, right? Navy SEALs do it all the time.
Yeah.
They train themselves how to do it and they practice it. They don't just do it when it's in crisis, they practice it. So why not parents? Because You know, kind of, we are first responders as
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with a client one day, and we had a good relationship to the point where I could say this. The client just kept telling me about the problems. I just don't know what to do, and I don't know what. And she just kept going on and on. And I said, well, we've talked about the importance of breath. "Oh, I know, but I just don't know what to do." And I said, well, maybe if you just shut the hell up and you started breathing rather than talking about the problem, something would change. And she looks at me and she goes, "Oh yeah, I'm doing that." And so we went through some breathing. We went through some deep breathing, belly, chest order. And we're, like you talked about, it stimulates the limbic portion of the brain and, stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system to bring us back down into a calm state. After about 10 minutes, I looked at her. I said, "How do you feel?" "Oh, I'm good." "Any problems?" "No, I can handle them." Okay. So if we just pause and we take some deep breaths, it de-escalates how we feel. And then we set the example for the kids. What other tactics would you recommend for parents when they run into situations where children are reacting in a way that maybe the parent's not happy about?
One of the things that I teach parents that I think is really important is this. It's an acronym called ATTUNE.
Okay.
You're thinking about the acronym ATTUNE. So stands for the A is attend, and then turn towards, understand, non-defensively listen, and empathize.
Oh, I like that.
Okay, so attend, right? When your kid is storming, how do we be fully present? How do we give them our undivided attention?
Mm.
That means putting the cell phone down. It means stepping away from the computer. It means doing whatever it takes to be fully present. I'm convinced that one of the reasons therapy works is simply because you have another human that is just attuning to you and your
Yeah.
needs
You got
for
an
45
observer right
minutes.
there. Somebody
Yep.
that's paying attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree.
I don't think it has much to do with whatever theory they're using. I think it has to do with that main thing. And the best therapists are those that know how to just do that.
Yeah.
Right. So as parents, learning how to kind of put our worries on the shelf for a minute and just be fully present for our kids, that's huge. And it's really, really hard. It's super hard to do.
It sets an example, though. I mean,
Yep.
in our day and age, we're very rarely just fully present. I mean, how
Yeah.
many times do you walk into a room and you see, I was going to say kids, but it's not even kids anymore. Like you go into a restaurant, you walk into a room, and there's a group of people sitting around, friends, family, whatever. And every single one of them is on their own phone. No interaction, no presence. They are in a million different directions, but they're not focused on each other.
And
They're
some
not
of them are
focused
texting
there,
each
right?
other, the ones
Yeah,
that are around the table.
right. That's the thing that
Sometimes.
always gets me. I'm like, what in the world's going on? But it's a powerful tool to just focus
Yeah.
in, to just stay there and listen, to
Yeah.
literally tune in. I mean, I think back to, I know I'm dating myself by quite a bit, but I know all of us, talking today get what I'm about to say. Radios, when I was a kid, you had a knob, you had a dial that you had to turn in order to get the radio station that you wanted. And so if I wanted to go from one radio station to another radio station, I would turn the knob and that would move the dial. And I was literally tuning in to that radio station. And in between there, you'd hear some static. And the way I've always envisioned tuning in and becoming attuned is that same way, that in between being focused, there might be a little bit of static. And until I can get my full presence, my full focus there, I'm still going to have a little bit of static. But tuning in really allows us to capture what's there. So
Yeah. That's a
absolutely
great
love that
metaphor.
concept.
I love that. It's a great metaphor. The turn towards is important too. And that literally turning towards, using our body language to
Physically.
communicate safety, and physically turning towards, making
Yeah.
eye contact,
Yeah.
getting on their level, right? I mean, I'm 6'6".
Mm-hmm.
that's different for me than it is for you, Steve. No
Yeah.
offense, right?
No, I'm not
Because
6'6", and
yeah, you're not
you always look
6'6".
down upon me when we talk.
So it means
Which
getting
most
on the
people do. I'm not a
same
tall guy.
getting on the same level. The teens I work with in treatment, um, obviously there's times when they become really escalated and need somebody to help them calm down. And my first thing is using body language, to not be too close, not be too far.
Mm.
I'm mirroring and matching what they're doing.
Yeah.
If they're way up here, I maybe come in a couple degrees lower, but I'm quickly kind of bringing my voice, my tenor, my tone down, my body language. I may come in kind of muscles tense. I'm quickly taking breaths, making sure, because our parasympathetic nervous system communicate with each other,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so that helps to calm things down. Um, Really quick, the understanding part, we've talked a lot about that, but just always having that question of what is it like to be you? Like I may think I know what it's like, but trying to really understand where they're coming from is so important.
It's a pretty
And
impactful piece when you ask a question of, how do you see this from your perspective? Tell me
yeah,
what's alive in you. How are you feeling right now? When
yeah,
you are experiencing this moment, what does that mean? I'm experiencing a certain way. How are you experiencing it? So
yeah,
it's pretty impactful. I mean, I read something probably 2 decades ago that I have held on to, that I believe it was in one of Stephen Covey's writings, where he said that aside from food, water, and shelter, that the number one need that all humans have is the need to be understood. And what a powerful lesson that is. Okay, so we've got the AATU of the attune, right?
okay, yep. So Anna's non-defensively listen. So all these are pretty related, right? But
Yep.
that's separating, our wants and needs from their wants and needs and just listening. And that's hard to do too. So we're not
Mm-hmm.
interrupting, we're not listening just to formulate our response. We're really listening and trying to, do some reflective listening to them, which then applies to the last step, which is empathy. How do we show empathy? Um, and try to take their perspective.
So
I was thinking
Scott,
about this.
oh yeah,
Oh, go
keep going.
ahead.
Sorry. I was
I
going to
want to
ask you a
share an
question
example.
about listening and getting triggered,
Okay,
but
go
we'll
for
come
it.
back to that. Now,
No, ask your question.
so my question is, when people listen in a situation where maybe there's some current conflict, one of the most common things that I see is that when I ask a question, I'm asking a question, and more often than not, I'm looking for a specific answer, right? Or I'm asking a question, and if the other person says something that I don't like, I'm triggered. What would you recommend to
Yeah.
people when going into a situation like this to not be triggered, or to be aware of those triggers, to manage those triggers?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being triggered. It's what we do with the trigger, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're going
Yeah.
to get triggered. And one of the things I think we do sometimes is we don't want to be triggered. And so we will avoid situations so we don't get triggered. Or if we are
Mm,
triggered, then we feel like we
good
have to
point.
respond. But getting good at recognizing the trigger and kind of set, oh, there's a trigger, but it doesn't have to control my behavior. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. It's not reality. It's just a thought. I can be present and listen to this other human's perspective,
Powerful
right?
thought. Yeah, that's
And
powerful.
acknowledge that I'm triggered. I think that's really key. Um, an example. I was thinking about this. I've shared this example before with people, but so I have 3 kids. My middle son, um, when he was in middle school, uh, he and I would battle over homework daily, right? It was just always a struggle getting him to sit and do some homework. And we were always in conflict about it. I felt bad about it. I knew he felt bad about it. And I started thinking in my head, well, I wonder if he's got some learning challenges or something that are undiagnosed, I don't know about. And, I'm connected in the community. I took him to the most preeminent ADHD guru in the Valley, and this poor kid, he's in middle school, so I don't know what that makes him, maybe 11 or 12. He spends an entire Saturday doing testing.
That's fun.
We go back the next Saturday.
He loved you for that.
Wife, yeah, I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
And my wife and I go in to get the results, and the doctor, Dr. Goldstein, says, Scott, the good news is that you're an involved parent. You're trying to look for solutions, and you realize that you might not have all the answers, and so you've come for help. The bad news is nothing wrong with your son. No learning difficulties there. This is all you. That's what he said. This is all you.
Nice.
And I had to look at that. I go, what does that mean? And so applying these things, attune, turn towards, have empathy, non-defensively listen. What I kind of started to feel is, what's it like to be my son? If he sees, oh, here comes dad again. I know he's going to ask about homework. So I'm going to lie about homework because I don't want to deal with the dad. So I'm going to tell him I'm done, even though I'm not done. But then I'm going to find out he lied. So I'm going to be mad. And we're in this collusion that just goes around and around. So I only changed one thing. I made a commitment to myself. I wrote it down. And I made a commitment that I was not going to bring up school, anything related to academics, until he and I had some sort of a meaningful connection, whether that's talking about the day or throwing a baseball or something. And if we didn't have a chance to have a meaningful connection that day, that just meant I couldn't bring up class. Even if I saw him watching TV and I knew he had homework and I knew he was going to fail his class, I couldn't bring it up. That's the only thing I changed. And you know what happened is, not only did the relationship improve, obviously, but he did fine in school.
That's great.
He didn't have to run from me anymore. He could just manage it. And once I had a meaningful connection with him, then I felt like I could say, how's school? Do you need any help? What can I help you with? But since we had more connection, we could talk, and he could ask for help, and I was happy to sit down and help. And it was a really powerful thing for me. And I've repeated that in my life in different ways since, over and over and over. If I think about what's it like to be him or her when I'm around, would I be doing the same thing?
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
That's interesting. I had this similar moment when trying to get through to my son when he was 14. And so what I did is I went and listened to all the music that I listened to when I was 14, just to get an idea of what my brain was going through at a similar age.
What did you listen to when you were that age?
What's that?
What did you listen to?
In 1972, Earth, Wind, and Fire was out.
Okay.
Parliament Funkadelic.
Oh, nice.
The jazz was what they called the GRP group.
Okay.
Which was Dave Grusin and all of that stuff. And then it was the tail end of Motown and the beginning of Tamla, the Spinners. So I just kept listening to that music just to try to get an idea of what I was not thinking, because I was 14. And just by having a glimpse of my 14-year-old brain, I kind of played with, okay, this is possibly what his 14-year-old brain is going through. So I might need to restate and revise how I'm going at him.
I think that empathy plays such a massive role in the openness. And Scott, you talked about this where that it provided the connection, but it also provided a space for your son to be able to open up to you. I feel like, all things being equal, that my son and I have got a pretty good relationship. And one of the things that causes me to say that is a recent conversation we had where we're talking about finances, and we're talking about, what is that going to look like? My wife and I have had to have some conversations now just because the kids are older, and we've got, a daughter that's 23, another daughter that's 18, almost 19, my son's 17. And so we're thinking through, okay, what does this look like? What does the transition from teen to adult look like? Because we hadn't really thought about it. We hadn't even had the conversations about it. And so at one point during the conversation, when I was talking to my son about what this looks like, what will mom and dad cover when, and when are you on your own? And there was one point where I said, okay, so tell me your thoughts. And he goes, yeah, that's fine. And I said, but okay, come on, this is you and me. I don't want fine. I want, what's your real thought? Poke holes in our conversation, because I'm not telling you that I'm coming to you with the perfect solution. I'm just coming to you with a solution, a idea. How I grew up was totally different. I mean, at 21 years old, I'm married and I'm cut off. Like, that was it. So I said, we're in a different situation and we're just trying to figure it out. So tell me what your thought is. And he goes, well, I don't know. I guess as I think about it, this part doesn't seem completely fair. So I'm not sure about that. And he brought up a couple of opposing points. I said, I appreciate you sharing that. That gives me some stuff to think about. Let me look into it and we'll get back together. And so I looked into it. We sat down the next day or 2 days later, and I shared a different perspective with them and said, okay, now as I've looked into it, here's what the perspective is. And we got on the same page with a shared solution that I think we both felt comfortable with. I believe that taking a step back and understanding who the person on the other end is interacting with, and are we completely in control with that person, i.e. myself, right? It breeds so much in terms of relational equity that is so powerful. Empathy cannot be understated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a mantra I share with parents too. The more connection, the less correction you're going to need.
Oh, love that.
Right. So those moments, like you're talking about with your son, those moments I've had with mine, those moments when you're connected, when there's a mutual trust and respect, and you're really hearing each other, the more frequently we're having those, the less we have to correct.
Yeah.
It's just what I've definitely seen over 25 years. The less connection we have, the more we're in that correction place where we're always trying to course correct them, and we don't feel like we have much influence. So anything you can do to build that equity, anything you can do, it's worth it.
Yeah. And I think we have to realize that, it's important that people understand emotional bank account deposits. Equity in a relationship has to come from understanding what the currency is from the other person's perspective, right? If we are not in a situation where we're making deposits that are impactful for them, and we just think that that's what they like, it's going to be less effective. Everyone has different currency, and it's critical that we understand what each person's currency is. My second daughter, for instance, her currency is time, and we always have our little coffee dates together, and we'll go sit and talk, and I'll just say, so how's life? And we'll chat, and she will just open up. And my oldest daughter, her currency is, believe it or not, like being able to solve problems. And so I'll say, hey, I got a challenge here, whether it's something in the home or I have this problem. Can you help me solve it? And then she just jumps right in, solves the problem. And now there's this connection, because I can look at her and say, that was unbelievable. I can't believe how you thought that through. That was, your work on that was impeccable. Wow. And now we have more connection that way. Well, Scott, we're at the point where I don't even think we got through half of the questions that we had talked about discussing today. And I think you were pretty wise and pretty astute when we said, hey, this might need to be something that we split up into a couple of different episodes. And so if you're willing, I would love to have you come back and talk more about this concept of becoming a more evolved parent, because let's face it, our kids need it. And going back to what Cicero said, that what society does to its children, so will its children do to society. I believe this is a topic that we need to continue to dive into. So can we get
that being said, we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
No, I'd love it.
I'd love it. Round 2.
Absolutely. I would love it.
Well, I think we've covered some great topics that are going to help our listeners to evolve as parents. And hey, listeners, round 2 is going to be coming up. I will get with Scott. We'll get it on the schedule. And we are going to bring you round 2 of this evolved parent. We're now going to call it a series. Maybe, Scott, we talk it through and it might be a 3-part series. I don't know. If you can stand talking to Miles and I for that long. I mean, you and I talk
quite a bit
during the week. So hopefully it's not too much. But some great topics there. Well, and on that note, folks, it is time for us to wrap up another episode of the Evolve podcast. Scott, what a great conversation. And we're so grateful that you came on today. Thanks for coming on, sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our listeners. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they have questions or they are in need of your services?
Or recommend a book. I recommend a book of some things that our viewers can take away.
There you go.
Wow, so many books. You want me to? I'll send you my book. You can put it on your website. My book recommendation.
Oh yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. That'd be great.
Yeah,
I'd love to do that. So get a hold of me a couple ways. So the website for Stillwater Academy is stillwateracademy.org. You can get on there and kind of see what we're all about. My personal email is scott.jones@stillwateracademy.org.
Great. Well, perfect. Well, listeners, make sure you reach out. We're going to talk about this in one of the next episodes, where too often we think we can do things on our own. And for some reason, there's a stigma about reaching out and getting help and getting coaching, getting counseling, getting the thing you need. I would encourage you to reach out. If anything has resonated with you today, don't wait. Get some help, get some coaching. Well, Scott Jones, thank you once again for listening to for jumping on and sharing this with our listeners. And hey,
it was a pleasure having you.
Yeah. Remember that it takes time and consistency to evolve, but first you have to disrupt. And now it's time for you to get out there and evolve.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Evolve Podcast. Follow us on your favorite podcast app, and if you haven't done so, please give us a rating. As an independent podcast, it really helps us get more reach. This podcast is part of our mission to help millions of people evolve into the best versions of themselves. Please check out our coaching services at evolve-cast.com or pick up some of our Evolve merch. Until next time, keep evolving.